Some houses are meant to be forgotten. Some tragedies never wash away, no matter how many years pass. When one family moves into a secluded valley home, one untouched since the Great Flood, they believe they're getting a fresh start. But the past has a way of holding on. And some places remember, the rain started the first night, soft at first, then relentless, and with it came the voices, the whispers in the walls, the echoes of something buried deep beneath the house. Footsteps where no one should be, shadows moving just beyond sight. And then, the river began to rise. What happens when a house refuses to let go of the past? When the floodwaters don't just drown, but consume. Some doors should never be opened. Some houses should remain abandoned. Watch until the end, but be warned. Once you step inside, you may never leave. I remember the first time I saw the house. It looked like a forgotten relic, hidden away in the farthest corner of the valley, far from the bustle of town. Its weather-beaten exterior, the kind of gray wood that had absorbed years of rain and neglect, told stories I was too afraid to listen to. But the price was right. A fresh start. My wife, Amy, and our two kids, Jacob and Lily, thought it was just what we needed. We'd heard whispers about the flood that had devastated the area years ago, how the house had been abandoned since. Yet, we thought we were untouched by its tragedy, ready to make new memories in a place that felt like it had been left behind by time itself. The rain came the first night we moved in. At first, it was gentle, a soft, steady tapping on the windows. But by morning, the rain had turned to a torrential downpour, the kind of rain that turns roads to rivers, the kind that soaks through your skin and makes your bones ache with the weight of it. We spent the next few days unpacking, trying to make the place livable, adjusting to the overwhelming silence that seemed to cling to the house. The atmosphere was thick, heavy, like the air itself was reluctant to move. There were strange creaks in the floors, low groans from the old beams that I could never quite place. Amy didn't seem to notice. She was too busy fixing up the kids' rooms, painting over the old wallpaper that still smelled of mildew. But I noticed. One night, as the rain hammered against the roof, I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, when I heard it. Something faint, almost imperceptible at first. A sound from somewhere deep within the house. A rhythmic thud. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind pressing against the walls. But then it came again. A single, hollow thump. I told myself it was nothing, but then another. This time it was followed by something else. Faint, distant voices. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words, but the rain drowned out most of it. I stood up, half expecting the kids to be playing in the hallway, but they were sound asleep in their rooms. I went to check on Amy. She was asleep too, undisturbed. I tried to shake the unease, convincing myself that the house was just old, and old houses make noises. But that night, as I lay in bed, the voices returned. This time they were louder, closer. I could make out snippets of sentences, murmurs that didn't seem human, words that seemed to float through the air with no source. My heart raced. I got up again, grabbing a flashlight. The beam of light trembled in my hands as I slowly crept through the dark hallways, checking each room. The kids were fine. Amy was still sleeping, her breathing even and steady. But then, when I passed the door to the basement, I noticed something strange. The door was ajar. The basement was where the old floodwaters had receded, where debris from the storm had gathered years ago. It was a place Amy and I had both agreed to leave alone. I hadn't even dared to go down there yet. I pushed the door open. The faint scent of damp earth and decay hit me instantly. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step a soft groan in the dark silence. And then I heard it, the sound of water. At first, I thought it was just the rain trickling through the cracks. But it was louder, more insistent. It was as if the basement itself was filled with water, sloshing around beneath my feet. I aimed the flashlight at the floor and froze. There, in the corner, was a small puddle. But it wasn't water. It was dark, thick, almost black. And then the voices came again. Not whispers this time. Clear, distinct. A woman's voice, a man's. They were calling, pleading, but the words were garbled, lost to the storm. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away. My flashlight shook, casting frantic shadows against the walls. The puddle seemed to move, as though something was shifting beneath the surface. Something alive. I bolted upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. The next day, the rain was still falling, but I couldn't focus on anything else. The house felt wrong. The strange sounds continued, the thudding from within the walls, the distant voices I couldn't explain. Even Amy seemed unsettled, though she couldn't put it into words. She mentioned that the lights flickered more often now. I dismissed it as faulty wiring. The kids were quieter too, their laughter missing from the air. Then, a few days later, I woke up to an unsettling sight. The river near the house had swollen to an alarming degree, overflowing its banks, creeping toward our property. By evening, the water had reached our front steps. That night, the house seemed to come alive. The creaks and groans were louder. The floorboards shuddered underfoot. And then, through the windows, I saw them. Shadows, moving outside. Figures that were not quite human. Distorted, ethereal, drifting along with the rising tide. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, but I was the only one awake. I crept toward the stairs. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped. Couldn't breathe. I could feel something watching me, something just out of sight. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps resumed. But they weren't on the floor. They were in the walls, tapping against the plaster. I rushed to Amy, shaking her awake. My voice was a frantic whisper. "We have to go." She was confused, groggy, but she didn't need to understand. The rain stopped. The river had receded, but only in one direction. The other direction, toward the house, was rising again. The water, thick and black, began seeping under the door, creeping across the floor. And then I saw her, Lily, standing in the hallway, soaked to the bone, eyes wide, empty. "Mommy!" Her voice wasn't her own. "Daddy, help!" The house wasn't just haunted. It was the flood itself, alive, angry, pulling us into its depths. As the water rose, so did the house's secrets, and we were trapped in its history. Some storms bring destruction. Others bring something far worse. In the isolated village of Hollow Brook, the rain never stops. At first, it was just an inconvenience, a relentless, unyielding storm. But then the villagers began to change. Their eyes hollowed. Their voices became whispers of something other. And the rain? It wasn't just water falling from the sky. They always said the rain collects souls. We never believed them, but now we understand. The storm isn't just a force of nature. It is alive. It is watching. It is waiting. And once you step into the rain, there is no coming back. Pray for the skies to clear. Pray that you are not next. Watch until the end. But be careful. The rain never forgets. It began quietly enough. Just another strange rumor whispered from one villager to another. In the small village of Hollow Brook, surrounded by a dense, oppressive forest, the locals had always held strange beliefs. Old superstitions passed down through generations, each one a tale to keep us wary of the darkness beyond the trees. But there was one that always haunted me more than the others, the one about the rain. As a child, I was told that the rain was the collector of souls, a place where the dead would gather before they passed on. The older villagers, their faces lined with years of hardship, spoke of it with a knowing fear. When the rain falls heavy and unrelenting, they would say, their voices lowering, "The souls of the dead are trapped within it. They seek bodies to claim, bodies that wander too close to the storm." I never believed it. I thought it was just another tale to scare the children, to keep us from wandering into the forest at night or playing near the river. But that was before the rain came. It was during the rainy season when it started. A stretch of days when the sky seemed to weep endlessly. It wasn't unusual for our village to be soaked during this time of year, but this was different. The rain began, and it didn't stop. Day after day, night after night, the storm only grew stronger. There were no signs of it letting up, and soon, the air itself became heavy, saturated with an oppressive dampness. The people of Hollow Brook, at first irritated by the persistent downpour, began to notice something else, something wrong, strange changes in their neighbors, in themselves. At first, I thought it was just the stress of the constant rain getting to people. But then, my neighbor, Mr. Hartley, started acting odd. He'd always been a quiet man, reserved, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yet one morning, after a particularly violent thunderstorm, I found him standing in the street, drenched to the bone, staring at the sky with an expression of sheer terror. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He didn't seem to notice me as I approached. "Mr. Hartley?" I called. No response. He just stood there, shivering. His clothes were soaked, his hands trembling violently at his sides. Then, without warning, he turned to face me, his eyes empty, as though he didn't recognize me at all. "I'm not Mr. Hartley," he said, his voice hollow. "Alien. I'm something else now." I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The air around him seemed thicker, heavier, as though the rain itself was drawing something from him. He turned slowly, as if sensing something I couldn't see, and then staggered off into the storm. I didn't follow him. I didn't know what to make of it. I only knew one thing. There was something wrong with the rain. The following days brought more signs. More people changed. Mrs. Langley, the sweet old woman who lived on the corner, began mumbling to herself in the middle of the street. She stared at the ground, whispering to someone or something that wasn't there. Her voice was hoarse, her once gentle eyes now glassy and wild. It wasn't long before the others began to whisper what I feared was true, that the souls of the dead were being trapped in the rain. The village square, once bustling with life, grew silent as the days dragged on. Those who ventured out into the storm began to act differently. Some returned home, but they were not the same. Their faces were twisted, their thoughts fragmented, as though they were being drawn into a deeper, darker place. They would stare at the rain for hours, hands trembling, minds lost in something I couldn't understand. Even the children, who once laughed and played together, began to wander off on their own, muttering things I couldn't make sense of. Then I saw it myself. I had gone out in the rain, hoping for some fresh air, some clarity of thought. I stood beneath the old oak tree in the center of the village, its branches swaying with the wind. The rain pelted me relentlessly, soaking me through, but I couldn't move. It was as though I was being pulled into it. And in the misty fog, I saw them, shadowy figures, flickering at the edges of my vision. The souls. They weren't human. Not anymore. They were something else, shapeless but unmistakably there, clinging to the edges of the rain like dark stains in the air. I felt them reach for me. Their presence was cold, suffocating. The whispers grew louder. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. But the souls followed me, urging me to step deeper into the storm. That's when I realized the truth. The souls weren't just trapped in the rain. They were the rain, the storm itself, waiting for the next person to wander too far, waiting for someone like me. I ran back to the village, my mind spinning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But it was too late. The souls had already taken hold. Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Langley, and so many others. Every one of them was being consumed, their bodies and minds twisted by the spirits of the dead. In the days that followed, the last of us gathered, those who hadn't been completely overtaken. We sought answers, but there were none. No way to stop it. The rain was all-consuming. It had always been here, and now, it was the only thing that remained. We tried to leave. We packed our things and fled toward the forest, hoping for refuge. But the rain followed us. The souls had spread too far. They had claimed the land itself. The storm never stopped, and we never left. As the days wore on, I felt it, Slowly at first, but undeniable. The rain was inside me now, filling every part of me, seeping into my mind. I could feel the soles, their cold touch pressing against my thoughts, twisting them, bending them into shapes I couldn't control. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but even that was slipping away. The last thing I remember clearly is standing at the edge of the rain, feeling its cold fingers press against my skin. The world blurred. The village dissolved into a fog of faces and whispers. The souls had claimed it all, and now they were coming for me. But I am no longer me. I am the rain. They say every town has its secrets, buried beneath whispers and half-forgotten stories. Some legends fade with time, but others refuse to die. In the quiet village of Blackwood, there is one name spoken only in hushed tones, Clara Marsh. A voice like an angel, a future stolen before it could begin. They say she drowned, but the truth is far more terrifying. Because when the rain falls, she returns. A song carried on the wind, a melody that lingers in the shadows. It calls to the living, pulling them closer to the river's edge. And those who hear it never truly escape. Tonight, as the storm rages, her voice will rise again. And this time, she's singing for you. Prepare yourself. This is the story of the drowned singer. It's funny how a place like this, quiet, small, and tucked away in the folds of the countryside, can hold so many secrets. They say you get used to the stories, the whispers that weave through the village like smoke on a damp evening. But there are some things that, no matter how much you try to dismiss them, stay with you. One of those things was the story of Clara Marsh. It was an old tale, one I'd heard countless times from the older residents of the village. Clara had been a beautiful singer, a local star, they said. She had a voice like something divine, something that could make the air tremble. She had been set to leave for the city, to perform for crowds of hundreds, maybe thousands. But just before she left, something happened. Clara vanished. Some said she ran off with a lover. Others said she took her own life. But the most popular version, the one the elders loved to whisper about over their mugs of tea, was that she had died in the river, drowned, dragged down by something from the depths. I don't know when the story stopped being just a ghost story for me. Maybe it was when I moved into the old house at the edge of town, just a few months ago. The house had always been quiet, always overlooked, but I hadn't expected it to feel so strange. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters, I could sometimes hear something, an eerie, distant melody, just faint enough that I thought it might be the wind. It always happened when the rain started. I tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to my overactive imagination or some odd echo through the village. But then it became too much to ignore. The melody, it wasn't just a soft hum. It was a song, a mournful, haunting song. It didn't belong in the village. It didn't belong in my house. It was coming from somewhere deep, somewhere far. But it was inescapable. The more I heard it, the more I started feeling something, like a shadow that hovered just beyond my sight. It was only when I found out about Clara's story that everything clicked into place. One evening, as the rain started, I decided to investigate. I'd never been one for superstition, but curiosity gnawed at me. Something primal, pulling me toward the riverbank. The fog hung low over the water, thick enough to hide the moon, and the air felt cold and oppressive. The river roared with the power of the rainstorm, but somewhere, underneath the sound of the torrent, I heard it again, a soft, lilting melody. It was her song. I couldn't explain why, but I needed to know. I walked along the river's edge, the ground slippery beneath my feet, the mist curling around my ankles. And then, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the fog or the movement of the trees. But no. There, in the distance, just beyond the old bridge, stood a woman. Her long, wet gown clung to her body. Her hair was matted and dripping. She was staring at the water, completely still, as if waiting for something or someone. Her face was obscured by her soaked hair, but there was something about her that made my blood run cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then her voice began to fill the air again, clearer this time, more real. The melody twisted through the wind like a lullaby, one I had heard before, but never so close. That was Clara Marsh. I don't know how I knew. Maybe it was the way the air shifted around her, or the way her song felt like it was vibrating through the very earth. Maybe it was the look in her eyes when she turned to face me. Slowly, deliberately. Her face was pale, almost sickly. Her eyes were wide and empty. She smiled at me, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was like a mask. And then she whispered something I couldn't quite hear over the rain. Something about coming back. I could see the tears in her eyes. Tears that should have been long dried. Tears that shouldn't have existed after all these years. I took a step toward her, but the ground beneath me suddenly felt too soft. My feet slid. My balance faltered. I found myself slipping toward the water. I tried to grab hold of something, anything, but my hand came up empty. The river surged forward, pulling me closer. And then, the song stopped. I froze. The fog thickened around me. I couldn't see the woman anymore. I couldn't hear the song. I couldn't even hear the river's roar. Everything went silent. I didn't dare to move, not even to breathe. The silence pressed in around me, stifling, suffocating. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for something to happen. But then, I heard her voice again. It wasn't the sweet, sad song this time. No, it was something darker, something desperate. "Help me," she whispered. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only the dark, swirling river. The woman was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. The hollow eyes, the twisted smile. Every time I moved through the house, I thought I saw her, just beyond the edges of my vision. Her voice, that song, followed me like a shadow. I couldn't escape it. The next morning, I went to the village council. I had to know the truth. An old man named Mr. Cray finally spoke. "You heard her, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. He leaned in closer. "You need to leave," he said. "The rain brings her back. It always does. When the song calls you, it means the next one will be claimed." I felt my stomach drop. I had heard the song. I had seen her. And now, she was coming for me. That night, the rain came again, heavier than ever. And from somewhere in the distance, I heard it, a soft, mournful melody. I don't know how long I can last. The song is getting louder. She never left. She never will. Because the singer is the storm. She is the rain.